Welcome back to the Business of Biotech, on location at the JPM Healthcare Conference. I'm your host, Ben Comer, Chief Editor at Life Science Leader, and today I'm speaking with Brian Hilberdink, President of U.S. Human Pharma at Boehringer Ingelheim, the world's largest privately held biopharmaceutical company with development programs in cardio-renal metabolic disease, CNS disease, immunology and respiratory diseases, oncology, and retinal health. Did I miss any, Brian?
I think you covered it.
Okay. Brian is making his second appearance on the Business of Biotech. He spoke with the show's founding host, Matt Pillar, back in the summer of 2023, and at that time was working to grow Leo Pharma's presence in the United States as the lead of Leo's U.S. operations. I'm looking forward to catching up with Brian today about his time at Leo and jump to Boehringer in February of last year, what lessons and learnings he brings with him from Leo to Boehringer, his strategy for growing Boehringer's U.S. business, and what issues or market dynamics he's monitoring in the U.S. Thank you so much for coming back on the show, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan. I'm excited to do this.
Boehringer or Boehringer? Do you say it both ways? Depending on if you're German in Germany or in the U.S.
I know it's a mouthful. Think burr, like I'm cold. Boehringer.
Boehringer.
Yeah.
Boehringer. Okay.
Yeah, and I know for years in the industry, people just refer to us as BI.
Yeah.
But we're really trying to brand, and we're really proud of the history and heritage, so it's Boehringer.
I've heard Boehringer and Boehringer, but not Boehringer.
Yeah,
so now I have a third pronunciation, and that's the right one, it sounds like. So
I think so.
I'll do the best I can.
I'm pretty certain.
I'll do the best I can. I mentioned your previous role, Brian, at Leo Pharma, but before that, you worked for 26 years at Novo Nordisk, a Danish company that has done fairly well in recent years with a product called semaglutide. Some folks listening may have heard of it. At the time you left, you were vice president of sales following a transition of Novo Nordisk's commercial model. You joined Leo, another Danish company, as head of the U.S. and as a member of the global executive team in 2023, I believe. Picking up perhaps where Matt left off, what can you say about your experiences at Leo? You probably learned a lot about the dermatology segment, for one thing.
I did. Leo Pharma is a focused medical dermatology company, and also, interesting enough, a privately held company that goes all the way back to 1908. Not as old as Boehringer, but an old historic company that actually made insulin on behalf of Novo Nordisk going back to 1923. So all those years at Novo, I knew about the history between Novo and Leo. And Leo was a company that was in need of a boost. Actually, we refer to it as a transformation to really turn the U.S. business into the primary growth driver. It's the single largest pharmaceutical market, particularly in medical dermatology, and that was my mission. And the idea was to try to grow the company ahead of a planned IPO. Fantastic experience, fantastic colleagues, great mission that the company's on. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that we did and Leo continues to do in terms of expanding the portfolio. So going beyond a anchor product, which was a biologic for atopic dermatitis, being able to add a first-in-class pan-JAK inhibitor that's been made into a topical, the first JAK for medical dermatology without a box warning for chronic hand eczema.
Because Insight had one of those too, but it has a black box warning.
It does have a box warning, and it's also not indicated for chronic hand eczema. So I think the fact that this is a unique area and a disease that impacts as many as 10% of people, I mean, it can be so debilitating that effectively you can't use your hands. So Leo being able to come forward to the marketplace with a treatment for that really provides new hope. And then also recently they added a Boehringer Ingelheim product actually to their portfolio for a disease called generalized pustular psoriasis. Even though it has psoriasis in the name, it's a horribly debilitating disease that can actually be fatal. It's an ultra rare disease, and Boehringer, which is you're going to hear about, is an innovation powerhouse in terms of just being able to develop molecules across multiple disease states, like you already commented on, made the determination that it would be in the better hands of a focused medical dermatology company like Leo than it would be for Boehringer to continue to market it alone. So kind of an interesting shared history for me.
Yeah.
Kind of being on both sides of that transaction, but ultimately super happy now to be at Boehringer and Ingelheim.
What is different about commercialization in the dermatology space versus maybe some other therapeutic areas, would you say?
I think dermatologists are very interesting people. Nobody accidentally becomes a dermatologist, right? They were all number one in their medical schools and made the decision to be in dermatology. I think dermatology, it is a very much, you'll hear from every single derm, it's very much relationship driven. And I felt very much when I was at Leo, I had to very much be the, kind of face of the company. I go to a lot of different derm conferences and get to know a lot of the dermatologists and just understand, what their various business models were and how we could best partner with them so they could make effective clinical decisions.
How did you approach that? Because I assume you probably didn't work with a lot of dermatologists previously prior to joining Leo. I mean, are you just a really good at small talk, at intro? I know I'm not, but I'm just wondering how you kind of break into that segment if, they didn't know you before that.
Lots of really talented people at that company who brokered introductions, but it also means that I accumulated a lot of air miles and went to a lot of conferences. And I did go to a lot of meetings. And at the end of the day, I started as a sales rep many years ago. And when I run into a stranger and they ask me what I do, I typically say I'm in pharmaceutical sales, because at the end of the day, I think we're always selling. And in this case, it was, selling the prospect of what Leo Pharma could do. Not too dissimilar when I'm at Boehringer Ingelheim. Now I'm, kind of selling what this company is all about. And the reason why I'm so excited about this podcast, and the reason why I ultimately went to Boehringer, is because I'm really happy with the work at Leo. Really great that it's on a growth trajectory, and it's a company that I hope your followers continue to follow as they continue to do great things and treat patients that wouldn't otherwise be treated with these medical dermatology conditions. But man, there was a tug to get back to big size and scale. When I looked at the pipeline, when I looked at the commitment that Boehringer makes to research and development, and just looking at that potential, that if we can now line that pipeline and innovation up with just having the right commercial ambition. And again, not saying that anything is broken or dysfunctional at Boehringer. On the contrary, it's been a very successful company. But I think with all of the launches coming up, there's an opportunity to kind of hit that next gear and to really have people understand that Boehringer isn't just innovative from what we do in our labs, but also innovative in our go-to-market approach, also innovative in terms of how we prioritize the patient and put them at the center and make a significant difference. And that to me is super exciting, especially in disease states like obesity and type 2 diabetes, chronic kidney disease, interstitial lung disease, getting back into oncology. I mean, just to mention a few.
Yeah. Well, have you found it difficult to have to navigate all of those different therapeutic areas? As you said, Boehringer, is active in quite a number of therapeutic areas. Now, you're not going to see physicians face to face, I don't think, in your new role. But how do you manage that? Just the fact of so many different disease areas with, very different dynamics, different kinds of physicians, all of that.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I do try to meet with customers. Okay. I do try to get to conferences. Obviously, I can't hit all of them. I have a clear comfort area in cardiometabolic, given all of those years at Novo Nordisk and, kind of some deep knowledge of some of those disease states. But one of the things that I'm really blessed to have at Boehringer is some great scientists and just great colleagues and people who do deeply understand the disease state. My job is to make sure that I basically, get out of their way, help enable them, find out what's going to make you most successful. When we have an innovation in a disease state like interstitial lung disease, I mean, we have a history and heritage in respiratory and pulmonary diseases. I think the question I ask as a leader is, what's going to take us to that next threshold? What's going to help you to be able to help providers to help their patients? That's my job, not being an expert on everything there is to know about, interstitial lung disease. I'm getting there, though. I mean, I do enjoy and getting to know a lot of pulmonologists using that example. But yeah, you have to kind of prioritize. My job is ultimately enabling everyone at Boehringer to be the best version of themselves.
So you felt that pull while you were at Leo. How did it actually come? And maybe through that, the product that went from Boehringer to Leo. I mean, was there an introduction made there? How did it actually come to pass that you went from Leo to Boehringer?
Yeah, the whole Leo Boehringer thing was more of a happy coincidence. I mean,
Okay.
I was in the prospect at Leo of basically meeting with everyone who had a dermatology product. I'm super active at meetings like JPM to kind of, speed date with as many companies as possible, find out who has a medical dermatology asset. And Boehringer was a company that we approached. And by the way, just super impressive through all of those interactions. But no, it was just more through my own contacts in the industry. An opportunity came up that their human pharma president position came up. And as I started to have conversations with individuals within the company, again, just that thought of getting back into obesity, cardiorenal. I don't want to say mission accomplished at Leo, but there was a great management team in place, a ready-made, great successor for my position. With the full support of the CEO and the chairman of the board of Leo Pharma, consulted with them in terms of, I got this opportunity.
Yeah.
I kind of made the decision that, listen, I got lots of runway, but I kind of also thought at my age and stage of career, how many more shots do I get to be able to lead at large size and scale? So again, it was very much, through the front door. I still have a ton of respect for Leo. What a great opportunity. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity between Novo Nordisk and Boehringer because it truly meant that I needed to run the entire enterprise. When you are a smaller company, when the company's been losing money and you try to get back into being cash flow positive, which is the situation the company's in now, you need to turn over every stone. You need to understand every aspect of the business. Now being able to take some of that philosophy and applying it at scale, I think it makes me much better at doing this job now than if I didn't have that experience.
Interesting. You're Canadian by birth, but you've spent a bulk of your career working for the in the U.S. for Danish companies, Leo and Novo, obviously. Boehringer is a German biopharmaceutical company, and you're getting close to, I think you're getting close to your 1-year anniversary with Boehringer. I'm curious to hear what you might say about the cultural differences between your previous Danish colleagues and your new German ones, maybe as it pertains to commercializing drugs, but I'll leave it wide open for you.
I also lived and worked in Denmark for 8 years, so 2 different rotations.
Oh, okay.
So it's a culture and a country that I'm very familiar with. And interesting enough, you mentioned Dutch. My last name is Dutch. I'm first generation Canadian. My parents were Dutch immigrants to Canada. So I guess I was made to somehow be in these Nordic type cultures. The thing about Boehringer is, yes, it is a German company, but it's actually highly globalized. It's highly international, similar to Novo Nordisk, and also what Leo is trying to do as well. Our global leadership team was very diverse. So when I think about the composition of the executive committee, when I think about the board of directors, when I think about the diversity of experience in headquarters in Boehringer, it's really dealing with a global company as opposed to it really, feeling like a German company. But the one thing that is really consistent about Boehringer, about Leo, about Novo Nordisk, and I never want to be on the wrong side of this equation, it's a patient-centric focus, highly ethical companies, highly research and innovation based. And that to me, I've always been the person who, we've all been to dinner parties where somebody wants to bash the innovative pharmaceutical company. And I always want to be that person to say, let me explain the company I work for.
Yeah.
And I can do that, feel really good about representing Boehringer Ingelheim. And, in the past, I've been fortunate enough to work for companies that truly do embrace taking that patient-centric approach. But then there is one aspect that's unique about Boehringer that does kind of differentiate it. I guess Leo was there because it's privately held, but also though was planning for an IPO, so we acted more like we're publicly traded. Boehringer is a privately held company.
The largest privately held pharma.
Right.
Yeah.
And as a result of that ownership structure, we can really take a long-range view. The company's been around 140 years, and we talk about how we focus on health for generations. We don't have to stand in front of analysts judging us on a quarterly basis talking about how the earnings are going. Company's very healthy, by the way, but we can make a decision in terms of the EBITDA level that we want to run at, the level of investment that we put in research and development, which, by the way, exceeded 27% last year. At our size and scale, doing 27% plus focus in research and development is almost unprecedented. And we can do that because the idea is that we want to continue to focus on basic discovery. We want to continue to have as many assets as possible in early development. So as we know, there's a lot of attrition. It just means that we have more shots on goal to be able to pull these products through the full development process and ultimately get innovation to patients. And it's a really great sustainable model. And I think that that's something that is very unique about this company and something I'm very proud to represent.
That makes a lot of sense. I've always thought about science, as everyone knows, is an unpredictable endeavor, and yet public companies, have to execute, have to try to hit their projections every single quarter, regardless of what happens in a clinical trial that's maybe unexpected or any number of external factors that can impact a company's development and commercialization efforts. So that makes sense, being able to take the long view, not being as pressed, to every quarter deliver a certain specific thing. But would you say, are there any downsides to being, and maybe there aren't, I don't know, but are there any downsides to being a private company versus a public one?
You could say if you don't like the culture, it's not going to change, because that culture has been ingrained for 104 years. Fortunately, I love the culture, and it's a really good fit for me, and I think it's a really good fit, for the more than 50,000 employees that we have globally. I really do believe that we are set up for the long run. I mean, like I said, we've been around 140 years. There's no intention of the company going public, and I think maintaining this long-range focus is ultimately something that is good for patients. I think it's not just even innovation and research and development. It's the approach that we can also take in terms of how we can help to condition markets, how we can help to define disease states. As an example, we're putting a lot of resources behind a campaign on chronic kidney disease. There are more than 35 million Americans that live with elevated microalbuminuria. It's something that you can test for with a simple urine test. But when people go for a standard metabolic panel blood test, it doesn't show up because you need to do a urine test. It costs like $12 to do this test. If you have elevated microalbuminuria way before your kidney function starts to decrease as measured through eGFR, it means that you have a high risk of endothelial dysfunction. This is a modifiable risk factor at the same threshold as hypertension or LDL cholesterol. Now, this is an area of interest in us, but we're really committed to banging the drum to, get the public narrative out there to get tested. We have this campaign that's running on television now called Detect the SOS. Now, if I was at a publicly traded company and we had a bad quarter of results, knock on wood, it ever happens at Boehringer, but let's just say you have to issue a profit warning because your, earnings are coming in a lot lower. That's where you need to start leveraging the cost base, doing things like, public awareness campaigns and research and development. Those are some of the easy cuts to be.
Yeah, right.
That easy cut isn't happening at Boehringer because we're, again, focused on the future. We're focused on the long run. So it continues to be business as usual. So that, to me, I think is really unique, and I just see it as an advantage.
We had the CEO of ProKidney on the show, which is a really interesting company, but he kind of hammered it home to me how bad kidney failure is, just in the context of dialysis and what it means for patients' lives who, have kidney failure, chronic kidney failure, and it makes it almost impossible to do most things when you're having to go in to get dialysis multiple times a week. I wanted to ask about your chief responsibilities at Boehringer as its U.S. head. Are you involved in things like prioritizing clinical programs? Are you still now at JPM, talking to everyone looking for potential acquisition targets or partners? Give me a sense of your job at Boehringer.
So my job is to run the business.
Okay.
We have a innovation unit, which you could say runs in parallel with the human pharma business unit. Obviously, I work in close collaboration with them. And we have quite a few representatives here from that innovation unit that are specifically in business development looking for different assets.
The innovation unit is globally centered, or is it based in the U.S. or?
Both.
Okay.
So it is globally centered, but we have a large presence in the U.S.
Okay.
We do a lot of basic research in Ridgefield, Connecticut, where our U.S. Campus is a very significant footprint. So we have a team here that is talking to a lot of different companies trying to find assets, particularly early development assets, a lot of preclinical. Our thought process is, again, let's take that long range focus. We don't need to be competing downstream for an asset that's completed phase 2 development and get into a bidding war with other pharma companies. Let's fill up the funnel. Let's get as many assets as possible. Again, let's take as many shots on goal as
Place
possible.
some bets.
So we can then bring those through the clinical development program, and we can define a clinical development program, which we have a lot of expertise on.
Right.
And then, with the hope that we're going to get some of them through to the end. I think the recent approvals that we have, those are both Jascade and interstitial lung disease and Hernexios, non-small cell lung cancer with a HER2 mutation. Those are actually both assets discovered at Boehringer.
In-house.
In-house. So, we do have this really good history of being able to discover, but also a good history of being able to get assets fairly early in development and then defining the clinical development path. But back to what I do on a daily basis, it's really running the business.
Okay.
It's how do I take, this great innovation that's coming from what we refer to as our innovation unit and define the go-to-market approach, making sure that we're ready to launch products. For products that are in the market, are we executing against the things that we said we would do? How do we know we're moving the needle on things like raising awareness on chronic kidney disease? Are we fully prepared for entry with our future obesity drug? Those are more the things that occupy my time.
Okay. What opportunities or challenges, Brian, do you find most enticing, I guess, in the context of your role at Boehringer and thinking about the company's strategy for 2026?
Right now we have 2 products that we've just launched. We have one in interstitial lung disease, and we have one in, as I mentioned, in non-small cell lung cancer. So I would say more of an opportunity than a challenge, but as you know, the early launch phase really dictates what that lifetime potential of the brand is. So making sure that it's clear of the decks, let's do whatever we can in order to make sure that we can get these products off to a good start.
Yeah.
And knock on wood, but so far so good. The pulmonology community and the oncology community is responding very positively so far to the fact that, we do have these new products coming to market. 2026 is also the year that we will be releasing a lot of data from our very robust obesity and liver health program. So we will enter into that anti-obesity MASH space in 2027. So making sure that when we do release the data that, again, we're managing the story and the narrative. You'll hear me say over and over again that I'm not going to be competing against Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly. I'm going to compete against clinical inertia. Let's recognize the fact that there's 100 million Americans living with obesity, and yet there's less than 10% that are getting an evidence-based pharmacological treatment. And I'm not saying that all 100 million need to be treated with pharmacological therapy, but it feels like obesity is at this tipping point. It's like type 2 diabetes 25 years ago. We used to blame the patient for giving themselves type 2 diabetes. Now we know it's a complex metabolic disease. Can we not get there with obesity and stop shaming the patient and also focusing on going way beyond pounds on the scale and talking about metabolic health? So 2026 is going to be the year that we need to start shaping the narrative because Boehringer is not known yet in the obesity space. If we do this podcast next year at JPM and we're still not knowing, I haven't done my job.
Okay. Yeah, I saw David Ricks speak during Eli Lilly's presentation at the conference yesterday, and he mentioned the fact that for folks who are prescribed one of Eli Lilly's GLP-1 drugs for obesity, on average, they've tried at least 30 different dietary and exercise interventions that haven't worked for those patients. So it's not like something hasn't been tried, before they are ultimately given those prescriptions, which I thought was interesting. I also wanted to pick up on something you mentioned about, preparing for a successful launch and driving a successful launch. There's this statistic that's bandied around a lot by executives I've spoken to, that 50% of drugs, new launch drugs, do not meet their expectations. Right. Why do you think that is? And what can you do to try to increase those odds, of success with a newly launched product?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on the disease state that you're in, right? Yeah. So if you're talking rare disease, the number one mistake is underestimating or overestimating the epidemiology. So just understanding the prevalence of the disease and the challenge it can be for healthcare professionals to identify a patient who's living with that disease and to get them treated.
Okay.
Another common area that can be a stumbling block is, can patients get access to your product? Because we can go through that whole clinical development program, we can develop a beautiful label, we can have great messages, but if patients ultimately don't have access to it in the form of insurance coverage, or even if it's a cash pay offer, as we're seeing more and more. So we need to constantly think about what's that right balance. Of course, we need to recoup the investment that we put into it, but to try to understand what's that right price threshold in order to get reimbursement, but also, again, make it a viable, sustainable product. And then last but not least, I mean, just good old-fashioned competition and share of voice, particularly if you're going into the primary care space. So who are the big players? What is already, well entrenched in physicians' minds? I mean, it's interesting, going back to my experience at Leo Pharma, what a great lesson learned, because it's one thing to be Novo Nordisk or Boehringer or Ingelheim, where you do have resources. Mm-hmm. Try competing when you are very much the small company and you're going up against big juggernaut companies that are doing lots of direct-to-consumer advertising, and they're outgunning you maybe 20-1 from a share of voice.
Have established relationships with all the key opinion leaders.
Exactly. So then you need to kind of figure out, okay, what can I realistically accomplish? What's my go-to-market approach? Which segment can I own? And this is where, like I said, I'm so grateful for that experience, because I kind of feel like those lessons learned are actually great lessons to take over to Boehringer. So again, as we approach these new markets, just because we have size and scale doesn't mean that we need to follow the same template of every other company. Can we be a little bit smarter? Can we segment the audience differently? Can we find different areas to differentiate the brand? If you're not differentiated, why is someone going to move off of what their current gold standard is? So, I mean, it sounds like kind of marketing 101, but we forget these lessons. And it's important to remember, drugs do not sell themselves. Mm-hmm. As good as they may be, as important and innovative to help patients, if there isn't the right plan to put around it to pull it through, it's never going to get lifted off the ground.
Yeah. Access, obviously, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's obviously a key aspect of whether a drug is going to make it to a patient or not, regardless of how good it is. Thinking back to, Eli Lilly now, it sounds like Medicare Part D is going to potentially start covering their GLP-1 for weight loss. So that'll be interesting to see. But I want to ask you next, Brian, a question about AI. It's an inescapable aspect of life in 2026, regardless of industry or profession. What can you say about how AI is changing product promotion, sales, and marketing, if in fact it is?
If it isn't, it should be, because it's gone beyond just table stakes. I mean, if you're not embracing AI, you are behind the game. And I do believe, when you think about the ability to synthesize data, I just talked about different go-to-market approaches. How do you segment? How do you adjust when you are on market? If you think about a launch, if it isn't going according to plan, what adjustments do you make? Being able to have real-time information on different providers, understanding patients' experience, as they're trying to navigate things like reimbursement. These are things with the right AI tools that are in place. You can have real-time access to information, and with that information, be able to adjust the approach you take. So this is something that we very much embraced at Boehringer. We've made a very significant investment in AI. And, it's a process.
Yeah.
And it takes some change management, because it means changing the way we work. And going from developing, pivot tables full of data to understanding how to write a good query.
Yeah, right.
And getting curious about questions that I can ask that are now possible to extract that information. So we actually built a AI innovation team that is continuing to look at piloting different ideas and, either fail fast or scale it up. And we're doing more scale it up than fail fast and learning very quickly in this space.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was curious if Boehringer had a kind of overarching AI strategy or if it was more of a kind of business unit to business unit effort, but it sounds like
I think it has to be overarching.
Yeah.
And that's where it is in a centralized function that can help provide support to the entire enterprise. And that way, too, we can build economies of scale. We can get learning. Of course, we're in an industry that's highly regulated, so we need to make sure that we're doing it with the right compliance boundaries. So we are learning as we go, but it's a worthy experiment, that's for sure.
Yeah, and changing day to day.
And changing, exactly.
Boehringer, excuse me, has been pretty active on the deal front in the last year. As head of U.S. Pharma, you're definitely involved in that decision-making process, I would assume.
Yeah, certainly, the U.S. is involved in every decision that the company makes from a strategy standpoint.
Yeah, okay.
We have representation directly on the executive team of the company in order to make sure that we always pull through that U.S. perspective. Our new chairman and CEO as of July, Shashank Deshpande, he always talks about the U.S. first mentality and always taking that lens of, is this going to work in the U.S.? And therefore, let's get consultation from people that are in the U.S. Also, what's interesting at Boehringer, when you ask what's it like working for the Germans, well, a lot of the people I'm dealing with on the other side are actually Americans. So, our head of our cardiometabolic therapy area, for example, is someone who previously worked in the U.S. The person heading up the obesity brand globally is someone who was actually, responsible for the Jardian sales organization.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So we're doing a really good cross-pollination of pulling in this U.S. perspective into the global team. So everything we do goes through the same strategic frame. I have to say that's a real strength in the company, is just really good cross-Atlantic collaboration.
What kinds of deals and partnerships are you interested in now, I guess, looking forward? Is it, complementary portfolios, new therapeutic areas? Can you give me a sense of that?
Yeah, I think we start with looking at the therapy areas that we're in. But when you're talking about cardio-renal metabolic, inclusive of obesity and MASH, you're talking a pretty broad spectrum.
That's a big space, yeah.
Yeah, so I think we can still say that chronic kidney disease, we're developing an asset in that space. But again, it's not just going to be one asset that patients are going to need. We want to be able to provide multiple tools in providers' toolbox to be able to ultimately provide good metabolic health. In obesity, I look forward to a day where there's 20 different obesity treatments on the marketplace. Again, similar to type 2 diabetes, when you think about the fact that, we once treated patients with metformin and insulin and sulfonylureas. Now you look at all the various agents that are being used, including SGLT2s and GLP-1s. Well, I think that that's where we're also getting in the obesity space. So we're looking for additional assets, and we have that already in our pipeline, but continue to scout for other obesity assets. Interstitial lung disease is ultimately an inflammation disease with a lot of carryover into rheumatology. So you could kind of say, how do we now look at adjacencies to interstitial lung disease, already working with pulmonologists, but can we start maybe moving into rheumatology as well because of the carryover? That's an audience that is in a good position to be identifying patients with interstitial lung disease. Could we potentially put something else in our reps bag in the future that appeals to that audience? So I think it's constantly thinking about adjacencies to current therapy areas. You did mention another one, which I haven't talked about yet, which is something maybe on the other side of 2030, and that's eye health. That's not necessarily an adjacency to anything we have, although you could say if we start with retinopathy, there is a strong link to type 2 diabetes. Yeah. But I think that's what's really cool about Boehringer, is that we got these fantastic scientists who, quite frankly, shouldn't be caught up with commercialization. They shouldn't be thinking about the go-to-market approach, but they should be thinking about as new pathways, new targets, innovate, come up with something that's new and transformational. Then what the commercial team will determine is this something that we should take forward? Does it fit into our existing portfolio? Or do we do like what we did with Skyrizi, which is actually developed in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and say at that point in time, what do we know about psoriasis and what do we know about some of the other conditions and indications that it treats, that someone like AbbVie is a better partner for it. Spivigo is another example that was out licensed to Leo Pharma. I mean, again, developed by Boehringer, gave it a try, but ultimately thought, I think it could be in better hands with someone who's focused on that disease state.
Because it's such a hot area, I want to ask you just a question about obesity, and I'm not familiar, I have to say, with Boehringer's obesity candidate, but is the approach in obesity to try to kind of go after there's obviously two giants in the space, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly. Do you go after a kind of niche obesity use, something downstream from just kind of simple basic obesity? Do you compete on price? You know, how do you think about positioning of an obesity product?
So all of the above are considerations.
Okay.
And it has to start off with, let's get our clinical data. And as I mentioned before, that we're going to have a clinical data report out in 2026, and that's largely going to inform what areas we can best differentiate on. Unfortunately, there's not a shortage of patients living with obesity that are undertreated.
No, there's not.
And, I do feel like, again, I would love to get to a dialogue that we talk about going beyond pounds on the scale and really talking about metabolic health.
Yeah.
And starting to really redefine what does metabolic health mean. So again, I think a conversation for a future podcast.
Yeah, that's an intriguing one.
I'm happy to come back and talk more about that in the future.
Yeah, let's do that. I want to, in our last kind of segment here of this conversation, Brian, I want to ask some questions about JP Morgan and your kind of broader outlook, although I do have one question that's more specific to a Boehringer product, but that I'll get to in a second. But for in the context of JP Morgan, for me, the conference kind of helps to set the agenda for the coming year. What's your sense of the mood this year at JP Morgan, maybe compared with last year?
I would say more optimistic. I've been at JP Morgan in the past when it's been literally and figuratively raining.
Yeah,
It's sunny
too.
It's sunny outside.
Last year, yeah.
We can walk between meetings and not get soaked. But I also feel like that's almost symbolic of it does feel like some clouds have lifted.
Mm-hmm.
I think that companies have found ways to navigate through some of these policy changes. I think from economic indicators, I think that people are feeling a little more bullish. We're hearing about an appetite for IPOs. We're hearing about an appetite for bigger investments. Mm-hmm. So I think on the whole, I feel like there's quite a bit of optimism in the air here at JP Morgan.
What are some of the key, I guess, remaining uncertainties regarding commercialization in the U.S.? What would you say there?
Well, I made reference to, some of the policy changes that have been navigated.
Yes.
And, a number of companies, including Boehringer, have, agreed to these MFN deals.
Yeah.
It does mean moving more manufacturing into the U.S., potentially means much more investment into the U.S., but I also think that there's greater certainty now in terms of how to navigate and move forward. We've heard the administration talk about potentially now looking at different ways that the PBMs work. Mm-hmm. We don't know what that means exactly. But I think what we do know is we've been able to get through this. I won't go into politics, but I think that if you just reflect and say, we have an environment that we can operate in, and there's, the potential for much more investment in the United States, it seems like we're moving in the right direction.
Right, absolutely. That's my sense as well. It seems much more optimistic this year, and pretty much all of my conversations so far while I've been here. I promised to ask you about, or I said I was going to ask you about a Boehringer product that kind of relates to this discussion. Boehringer was awarded the FDA Commissioner's National Priority Voucher for Zogertinib, okay, in patients with HER2 mutant non-small cell lung cancer. Can you give me a sense of kind of how that happened, or I don't know if you participated in those meetings at all, but give me a sense of how that selection was made and what it means.
I think the agency has made oncology and a lot of rare diseases a priority. And they've been talking for quite a long time about trying to find different expedited ways to be able to get innovative products to patients much faster. And I have to applaud the FDA for coming up with a short list of candidates, which we didn't petition for. And then we received notification that our drug, so zocertinib, also known by the brand name Hernexios, that for an indication for non-small cell lung cancer with a HER2 mutation in first line, meaning not previously treated, received this commissioner's voucher. And that commissioner's voucher, once you pass screening, is an approval window of 1 to 2 months. So
pretty incredible.
even though oncology can get approved with phase 1 data and follow this rolling RTOR process, it probably expedited approval by about 6 months, which is pretty remarkable, because I can tell you, by joining Boehringer, learning about this disease state, I've also had the opportunity to meet patients that are living with non-small lung cancer with a HER2 mutation. And we talk internally on, okay, well, what could be the size of this product? And, does it ever have blockbuster potential if we move into other tumors or whatever? I'll tell you, for these patients, it is a blockbuster. For these patients, it has the opportunity to be a game changer because it offers hope. And I think anything that we can do to have products that could help provide hope and give clinicians another opportunity, particularly living with cancer, and if the agency can support getting those products to the marketplace faster, that's a good day.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, the Commissioner's Priority Review Program reduces the evaluation to 1 to 2 months. I think that was announced, I want to say in November, is that right? So is it any day now?
Like literally any day now, we're expecting to get that approval. So it is already on the market for second line. This is the first line indication. And it literally could come any day now.
That's kind of a short runway to get up to speed for the launch for that. So you've probably been, I would assume, pretty busy,
The team's busy, but the team is already out there. And
in second line.
The team has already been out there in second line. So again, patients that have been previously treated have the opportunity to add on Hernexios. Now, of course, we can move it into first line. So it is building on the momentum that's already been established, the relationships that we already have with oncologists. And again, that's where the team and the company made the investment in going out and getting the right team, the right people. They've been out there building relationships. So we're ready to go.
All right. Well, final question. Your top priorities for JP Morgan this year, and maybe top priorities for 2026?
So top priority for JP Morgan is really to help get the Boehringer name out there. We're a company that, again, is privately held. We're not doing investor meetings, but we are here to talk about the fact that this is a special company. This is a different kind of company. And in 2026, we are going to be releasing quite a bit of data in obesity. And we want people to understand that we got a plan behind this. I want to find platforms to talk about things like chronic kidney disease and have people ask, well, what are we doing about it? How can I help? So by creating a platform and getting it out there that, Boehringer is a very innovative company that's been around a very long time, but we're also going to be known as a commercial powerhouse. The first words I said when I came to Boehringer, literally flew to Newark Airport, which apparently is not the best airport if you want to get up to Connecticut, got in the car, got myself up to Bridgefield, got out of the car, made myself to the auditorium. First 4 words are, I love to launch. And that's exactly what I want to do at Boehringer, is launch and launch well and be able to bring this innovation to the patients that could benefit from it. And I want the whole world to know that. So JP Morgan is a fantastic platform to get that story out.
Fantastic. Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime, and maybe we can book that date next year at JPM.
Let's do that.
Yeah,
let's do that.
Awesome.
We've been speaking with Brian Hilberdink, President of U.S. Human Pharma at Boehringer Ingelheim. I'm Ben Comer, and you've just listened to the Business of Biotech. Find us and subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts, and be sure to check out our weekly video casts of these conversations every Monday under the Business of Biotech tab at lifescienceleader.com. We'll see you next week, and thanks as always for listening.